This leader is provided to permit the projectionist to adjust the projector before the film begins. The volume and tone are identical with the soundtrack which follows.
Across the world, the ruins still stand, ziggurats rising from the deserts of Mesopotamia, temples carved in stone along the Nile, pyramids piercing the jungles of Mexico, columns broken and scattered across the hills of Greece, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, and yet they all tell the same story. They spoke of shining beings who descended from the heavens, gods, angels, or something stranger. They gave fire, law, and civilization to mankind. They taught astronomy, medicine, and war. They punished rebellion with floods and demanded worship in return. What were these beings truly? Were they aliens from distant worlds? Interdimensional travelers slipping into our reality for reasons we still cannot grasp? Perhaps they were something beyond all of these categories, something outside of human comprehension. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, and their shadow lingers through every great civilization of the ancient world.
Join us as we search for the truth about where we came from on the Anunnaki Connection.
For more than 2,000 years, these ruins remained undiscovered. For centuries, the only people who saw these remains were occasional nomads who camped near here.
At the turn of this century, when archaeologists first came to Iraq, or as it was called then, Mesopotamia, they were looking for the biblical city, Babylon, but they uncovered even older civilizations. The digging started here, in the Fertile Crescent. The land between the rivers looked promising because of the possibilities for irrigation agriculture. Archaeologists knew that early civilizations grew along the banks of major rivers. Here, it was the Tigris and Euphrates.
These rivers were fed by waters from the mountains to the north. Not far from here, ancient cities have been discovered. Around 2700 BC, they were populated by Sumerians. In this area, archaeologists have found proof that cereal agriculture was the basis of that civilization. Irrigated fields produced a dependable food supply for Sumerians. They dug ditches and brought river water to their dry lands, the first step toward large-scale farming. Farmers have been irrigating this area for nearly 5,000 years. Canal systems crisscross the whole land. The Sumerians turned the desert into a fertile delta. With an abundant food supply, the population grew, with Sumer divided into several city-states. This pattern was quite different from Egypt, which at the same time was developing into a unified country. We think about 200,000 people lived in a typical Sumerian city-state. The temple was the center of Sumerian city life. At Ur, archaeologists uncovered another temple called a ziggurat. Each city-state was organized around the worship of the deity whose home was the temple.
Mainstream archaeology tells us that Sumer was the birthplace of civilization, the first cities, the first writing, irrigation canals, temples, and laws. But the Sumerians themselves never claimed credit for these breakthroughs. In their own tablets, they wrote that it was the Anunnaki who descended from the heavens and laid the foundations of culture. The word Anunnaki itself tells us who these beings were. It comes from two root words in the Sumerian tongue, Anu and Ki. Anu was the supreme god of the heavens, the father of the divine assembly, ruler of the sky. Ki was the earth, the realm of man. And so the Anunnaki were literally those who from heaven came to earth, beings who crossed the boundary between the divine and the mortal, who descended to shape the world of men. At the head of their pantheon was Anu, the distant sky father, seated in the highest heavens. Beneath him was his son Enlil, the storm god, who cleaved heaven and earth in two. Enlil became lord of the air and the atmosphere, and it was he who decided the fate of mankind. His brother was Enki, lord of the waters, master of wisdom and creation, who dwelt in the Abzu, the subterranean deep. Enki was the god who shaped mankind itself, and who later defied his brother to save humanity from the flood. Alongside them stood Ninhursag, the mother goddess, described as the nourisher of humanity and the womb of the earth. There was Inanna, or Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and fertility, both alluring and dangerous. There was Utu Shamash, the sun god, who brought justice and light and handed the laws to kings. Together, these beings formed the great assembly of the Anunnaki. The tablets tell us that the Anunnaki chose who would rule, and that the laws and boundaries of civilization were decreed by them. When Hammurabi inscribed his famous code of laws, he credited Shamash, the sun god, as the divine source of justice. Mainstream historians explain the fall of Sumer through conquest, soil exhaustion, and shifting rivers. But in the tablets, floods, famines, and plagues were punishments sent by the gods. When humanity grew noisy and rebellious, Enlil sought to wipe them out. It was Enki who intervened, warning a chosen man to build an ark and survive the deluge. The biblical Noah is only the later echo of this much older Sumerian tale. In Egypt, too, we will find stories of gods who came from the stars, who ruled before the first pharaohs, and who shaped the destiny of mankind.
Farming began to develop in the Middle East around 8000 BC, and then spread after 3,000 years into the Nile River Valley and the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There, the Mesopotamian city-states would evolve. But in the Nile Valley, a unified kingdom of Egypt would come into being. It's believed that the people who settled Egypt had been forced by the advancing deserts of North Africa into the valley of the Nile. The people found the river a plentiful source of water for their herds. They discovered that they could irrigate the land and grow crops. They were among the first of the ancient peoples to become food producers instead of food gatherers. They rapidly developed the science of agriculture. The more ambitious projects, the digging of irrigation ditches and canals, demanded large-scale planning and the cooperation of many people. Beside this step pyramid lie many tombs of nobles. Inside these and other tombs, relics have been found, clues to the way Egyptians lived and worked. Ancient hammers and chisels show us how they carved words and pictures into stone. Molds for making bricks show that ancient brickmakers worked much like brickmakers still do in Egypt. Models of ancient Egyptian homes found in the tombs are similar to the mud brick homes in many villages today. Hoes, like this relic, were used by ancient farmers to cultivate the land. From the hand-held hoe, the Egyptians developed the plow that could be pulled by animals, a great step forward in the progress of civilization. The Egyptians celebrated the plow in tomb paintings. With the plow, they could cultivate more land and grow the large amount of food that was needed to support a great population. The Egyptians also developed a system of writing called hieroglyphics that was originally designed to be carved on stone and was also used later for recording important religious works, such as the Book of the Dead. A simplified form of hieroglyphics was written on paper, another ancient Egyptian invention. A dynasty of all-powerful pharaohs ruled the country. They claimed their authority directly from the gods. Egyptians had many gods.
Mainstream archaeology presents Egypt as the natural outgrowth of the Nile, a river that gave life to a desert, allowed agriculture to flourish, and fed the rise of a unified kingdom. It speaks of the pyramids as tombs, of irrigation as ingenuity, and of pharaohs as mortal kings who claimed divine favor. But beneath the sands lies another layer of the story, one where Egypt was not just the creation of men, but of gods who came from beyond. The Egyptian pantheon is vast, but at its heart are patterns that mirror the older Sumerian world. Osiris, lord of the underworld and resurrection, carries echoes of Enki, the wise god who descended into the deep, associated with water and the renewal of life. Isis, Osiris's consort, mother and magician, reflects Ninhursag, the Sumerian mother goddess who nourished humanity. Horus, the falcon sky god who avenges his father, recalls the storm-bearing heirs of Enlil, gods of rulership and warfare. And Thoth, scribe of the gods and keeper of hidden wisdom, is remembered in Mesopotamia as Ningishzida, the serpent lord of the tree of truth, a mediator between heaven and earth. Even the great monuments bear the signature of a knowledge that seems to exceed their time. The pyramids, officially described as tombs, align with Orion's belt and the stars of the heavens. The Sphinx, half man and half lion, points to the zodiac itself, watching over the ages. To the Egyptians, these were not just stone. They were machines of eternity, bridges between the world of men and the realm of the gods. Pharaohs ruled as divine kings, but their authority was never their own. Every inscription declares that kingship descended from the gods. The pharaoh was Horus in life, Osiris in death, a living conduit of divine blood. This is the same claim made in Mesopotamia, that kingship itself was a gift of the Anunnaki. Egypt remembered it differently, but the theme is the same. Rulers on earth legitimized by beings from heaven. The gods of Egypt, like those of Sumer, carried the marks of the Anunnaki. Anu, the distant sky father, becomes Ra, the shining sun at the highest point. Enlil, the stormbringer, becomes Set, the chaotic force who rules the desert and the storm. Enki, the wise lord of water, becomes Osiris, drowned, dismembered, yet reborn as lord of life. The myth changes, but the pattern remains. Ancient texts speak of the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus, a race of divine kings who ruled before the first dynasties. Some say they came from a lost island swallowed by the sea. Others claim they descended from the stars. The Sumerians would have recognized them as the Anunnaki. In Egypt, the Anunnaki wore new faces. They became gods of death and resurrection, of sun and flood, of the Nile and the sky. But their role remained the same: the givers of kingship, the masters of knowledge, the rulers who stood at the threshold between heaven and earth.
India, a country stretching nearly 2,000 miles from north to south. A giant triangle separated from the rest of the world by vast stretches of ocean and the mountain barrier of the Himalayas. Across the flat desert land, India's early invaders, coming down the mountain passes, drove the original settlers to the south. These Aryan conquerors occupied northern India and ushered in the Hindu period of history. As they expanded, the Aryans settled in what are today Patna, Delhi, and other northern cities. These ruins stand near Delhi to this day. It was near Delhi that, according to legend, a mighty war was fought between rival forces of Hinduism. Out of it, a unique set of beliefs and rules emerged, touching upon all phases of life. Throughout India, imposing temples stand witness to the deep religious feeling of the Hindu. To Hindus seeking religious knowledge, individual well-being and possessions are unimportant. And so a great part of the Hindu creative genius has turned to religion. Each of the many forms of the Supreme Being to whom all Hindus pray has its temples and its worshippers. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and the numerous forms and incarnations of these gods are rendered in stone. The highest art of India is seen in carvings made during the period of the Gupta dynasty. Gupta kings ruled northern India in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries AD. And under the Guptas, some of the greatest masterpieces of Indian art were created. Although it lasted less than 300 years, it is considered the classical age of India's culture. After the 8th century, new waves of invaders swept down on the plains, burning, fighting, pillaging. Arabs, Afghans, Turks, all of them fanatic Muslims, littered the Indian countryside with ruins. Among the wreckage stands this wrought iron column of one of the Gupta kings as a reminder of the short glory of this proud Hindu dynasty. Not far from it, near Delhi, a Muslim Tower of Victory was erected, made of carved red stone and rising 238 feet above the ground. It symbolizes the might of the Muslim conquerors.
In India, the ancient Vedas and the Mahabharata preserve stories of gods who wielded immense power, weapons of fire, and machines that could fly across the sky. To modern historians, these are just allegories, metaphors for storms, lightning, and cosmic forces. But when read alongside the stories of Sumer and Egypt, the parallels are too close to ignore. The Rigveda describes the storm god Indra, possessor of the thunderbolt, who battles serpents and demons with a weapon called the Vajra. Much like the Mesopotamian Enlil, a punishing storm god, and the Greek Zeus, hurling thunderbolts from the sky. The power of the heavens was a weapon, devastating and precise, remembered in each tradition under a different name. Shiva, the destroyer and creator. His wrath, but also his role as renewer, sounds much like Enki, who could both preserve life and unleash the waters upon the earth. In the Mahabharata, the gods grant mankind celestial weapons called astra, capable of leveling entire armies, a memory perhaps of technologies once wielded by the same beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. Even the stars themselves are woven into the myths. The Vedic nakshatra of Mrigashira links to Orion, the cosmic hunter whose pursuit across the heavens shows up in Greek, Norse, and Sumerian traditions. Was this constellation sacred across cultures because it was home to the same gods remembered under different names? The Hindu tales also speak of flying machines, vimanas, that carried the gods across the sky, waging war between heavens and earth. Ancient astronaut theorists see in this the echo of Mesopotamia's sky chariots, the vehicles of the Anunnaki. If the gods of India and the gods of Sumer are the same, then the memory of these machines may have been preserved across continents, retold as myth, but rooted in reality. So where did these Anunnaki gods come from? Anthropologists tell us that religion began as a way to explain the unexplainable. Early humans, confronted with storms, floods, death, and the stars, gave these forces names and personalities. Gods, they say, were born out of fear, ritual, and imagination, tools for survival in a dangerous world. From this perspective, the Anunnaki were nothing more than symbols, mythic projections of human needs. But here's the problem. The Sumerians didn't tell us about theoretical ideas that they had just bouncing around in their heads. They wrote about beings, flesh and blood, rulers who descended from the heavens above them, who built cities, apportioned the land, and decreed the laws of civilization. These texts describe a time before the flood, when kingship was first lowered from heaven, and when gods walked among men. Then came catastrophe, the great deluge that reset the world. Afterward, only fragments of memory remained. This fractured memory may be what later civilizations inherited, a recollection of a time before humanity was remade, or perhaps before the earth itself was fully prepared for human life. Some have speculated this was not merely a mythic flood, but the echo of something larger, the terraforming of the planet, the reshaping of the earth by forces beyond human comprehension. The further back we look, the stranger it becomes. Our written records vanish past the 4th millennium BC. Before Sumer, history dissolves into prehistory, and yet scattered clues remain. Megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, older than Sumer by millennia, show advanced astronomical alignments and architecture long before the so-called first civilization. The Sumerian king list describes reigns of tens of thousands of years before the flood. Geological evidence hints at sudden shifts around 10,000 BC, when ice sheets melted and global seas surged. Something happened. Something that broke the line of human memory.
It all started many thousands of years ago. It started in the Garden of Eden. And I want to read you about it in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. It's all recorded. All the troubles, all the difficulties, all the problems, all the headaches, all the wars, all the confusions, all the greed and jealousy that we have today started in the Garden of Eden many thousands of years ago.
In Genesis, we are told that God placed man in Eden with one command: do not eat from the tree of knowledge. A serpent appears, whispers to Eve, and tempts her to defy the command. She eats, gives to Adam, and their eyes are opened. For this, they are cursed, cast out, condemned to suffering. This is the foundation of the biblical story. Mankind is guilty, forever in need of obedience. But in the older Sumerian texts, the story is not one of sin. It is one of rebellion, of survival. The serpent is none other than Enki, Lord of Wisdom, who defies his brother Enlil by giving humanity forbidden knowledge. Just as Prometheus stole fire from the gods, Enki gave mankind the tools to live, to think, to see. It is Enlil, the storm god, the punisher, who wished to keep mankind ignorant, who later tried to wipe humanity out in the flood. In this older version, it is not the serpent who lies, but the so-called God. The biblical authors twisted the story. The serpent was not the villain, instead, a protector. Enki was cast as Satan because he gave humanity what the ruling gods wanted to withhold: knowledge, freedom, the spark of civilization. And this is where religion begins. From the start, it was about control, a system to keep mankind in line, to turn fear of the divine into obedience to rulers who claim to speak for the gods. Whatever the Anunnaki were, alien or angel, they knew our weakness, our hunger for meaning, our tendency to worship. Did they take advantage of that? Or did they plant it in us deliberately? A feature, not a flaw, programming us to kneel before them. Modern science has even found hints of this in our biology. Some researchers speak of a God gene, suggesting that spirituality, even the urge to worship, is hardwired into our DNA. Is that evolution or engineering? Were we designed to seek gods, to crave authority, to hand over our power? Does a built-in bias toward spirituality live in our DNA? The phrase God gene came from geneticist Dean Hamer, who argued in 2004 that variation in a neurotransmitter gene called VMAT2 helps tilt some people towards self-transcendence, the trait psychologists use as a proxy for spirituality. It works as a transporter that loads dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and histamine into synaptic vesicles, the machinery that shapes reward, salience, awe, and motivation. The spirituality knob can be measured as self-transcendence in Cloninger's temperament and character inventory. This trait does show genetic influence. If the Anunnaki were real, divine, alien, or otherwise, they didn't need to invent religion from scratch. They could simply lean on human wiring that was already there and install a bias toward reverence as a feature rather than a bug.
Religion is a way of life that describes the duties and relations of man to his God. Adherents of all religions join in the belief that man's coming into the world necessarily brought religion with God. Man in his primitive state sought ways of overcoming his environment, the fire of the sky, the wrath of the sea, the fury of the winds, and the heat of the desert, which he tried to control or appease. Some primitive men attempted to curb such forces with magic. Others turned to a kind of nature worship. As time passed, man tried to invoke the aid of the primeval forces. Eventually, in most religions, man associated these forces with some one great spirit or God. Through the ages, different religions have arisen and some have declined. 5 of the great religions endure and continue to guide millions upon millions of people the world over. These 5 had their beginnings in southwestern Asia.
It was here that Hinduism arose. Arabia cradled Judaism. Out of Hinduism grew Buddhism. And out of Judaism developed Christianity. Most recently, Islam has developed.
Where did our stories come from? If humanity was reset, what are we actually remembering? Mainstream chronology begins when clay meets stylus. Push past 5,000 or 6,000 years and written memory dissolves. But the Earth keeps receipts. At the end of the last ice age, shorelines weren't where they are now. Seas were lower by more than 100 meters. As the ice collapsed, water rushed in and coastlines sprinted inland. Whatever harbors, shrines, or villages clung to those paleocoasts now sleep under the continental shelves. That alone explains why deep time feels like silence. Much of it is underwater. On August 21st, 2025, Egyptian authorities revealed the recovery of 2,000-year-old artifacts from a sunken city in Abu Qir Bay, near Alexandria. Beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, just off Alexandria's coast, lies a city swallowed by the sea. For centuries, it was thought lost, until divers began pulling its treasures back into the light. Statues of gods and kings, ancient coins, and even a sphinx bearing the name of Ramses II, all resting in silence for nearly 2,000 years. What if this sunken city hides a deeper story? One that ties into the legacy of the gods themselves. The finds tell us this wasn't a small trading outpost. It was a place of wealth, ceremony, and power. The city fell after earthquakes shook the delta, and rising waters buried its streets. A story we've heard before, civilizations rising, then vanishing under the waves. The flood myths of Sumer, the deluge of the Hebrews, even tales from India and the Americas. Always the same pattern. Right on the hinge where before becomes after, around 10,000 BC, Göbekli Tepe appears. Stone enclosures and T-pillars, built by hunter-gatherers with star awareness and engineering nerve. If an industrial civilization had risen thousands or even millions of years before us, would we even know? After a few 100,000 years, cities crumble and metals oxidize. What remains are only geologic whispers, odd carbon isotope jolts, synthetic residues, peculiar sediments, anoxic ocean layers. When that world broke, by climate whiplash, volcanism, impact, or something we don't have language for, the ocean took the edges, forests reclaimed the middle, and memory collapsed to myth. The survivors did what survivors always do. They rebuilt shrines first, then cities. Two possibilities branch from that moment. Caretakers. The Anunnaki arrive to a wounded planet, stabilize it, and reboot. They seed soils, dam rivers, and stand up a cultural operating system. Calendars, law, temple-led agriculture, kingship. They compress knowledge into rituals so it will survive the next shock. Civilization restarts on rails. Conquerors. The Anunnaki trigger or exploit the collapse, clear the board, and install themselves as gods. They redirect the old animist current away from river and ancestor and into ziggurat and throne. Obedience becomes holiness. Tribute becomes rainfall. The same awe circuits fire. New endpoint. Every civilization remembers the moment the human first opened their eyes. Across languages and continents, the story is told with the same three tokens: earth, blood, and breath. In Mesopotamia, Enki and Ninhursag shape a body from clay and spike it with divine essence, the blood of a god, so that a living worker can carry the load of heaven. Some retellings say Marduk, the older tablets point to Kingu, or the sacrificed god Geshtu-e. In Egypt, the ram-headed Khnum turns people on a potter's wheel and brings them to term like vessels from the Nile mud. In Greece, Prometheus presses man from clay, and Athena leans close with the animating breath. In China, Nua kneads yellow earth into figures and breathes life into them. Among the Yoruba, Obatala sculpts the forms, and Olodumare grants the breath. In the Bible, God lifts dust from the ground and breathes a soul into Adam. Even the Popol Vuh remembers failed prototypes, mud and wood, before the successful people of maize. The variables barely change. There is always the earthy substrate shaped by a hand, the drop of essence that binds the new being to its makers, and the moment of activation when the lights come on. The recipe for a human being. Could these ingredients be metaphors for a genetic procedure? Clay and dust are the local genome, the best available substrate on this planet. Modern Homo sapiens emerges in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. Around that window, the planet carries a whole cast of near humans: Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo erectus lingering in Southeast Asia, Homo naledi in southern Africa, and other archaic sapiens and Heidelbergensis grade populations in Africa and the Levant. We know later admixture happened. Living people outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. Some carry Denisovan, proof that these lineages were compatible at the genetic level. If someone wanted a leap, the raw material was already walking around. This leap wouldn't hinge on a single miracle gene. It would be a tuning of systems. You would nudge the networks that pattern the developing brain so working memory and abstraction get a longer leash. You would tighten the feedback loops that bind breath to voice, cortex to tongue, so language can ride the air. You would soften or sharpen the chemistry of salience and reward, so teaching, ritual, and cooperation leave deeper tracks. You would fortify immune systems and metabolism for crowding, grain, and animals, directed hybridization and backcrossing, planned unions among compatible hominins with donor gametes to concentrate traits across a handful of fast generations. Why the blood? Because essence is transmitted in blood. Why the breath? Because breath is voice, and voice is mind shared. Why the dirt? Because everybody is of the earth. If you had to explain a lab to a village, you would use the materials they know. That's why this story repeats across time and culture. We do not know what the Anunnaki truly were. Some see craft in the sky and call them aliens. Others see that theory as a bridge too far. Both views can hold their ground. Perhaps they were human, survivors from an advanced cycle so old it's become geology, who came back after a planetary disaster and restarted the clock. Perhaps they were off-world engineers who seeded a breakaway civilization here, bred a hybrid species to inherit the surface, and then withdrew to wherever home is. Or perhaps they were not beings in any way we're prepared to accept. Predators or patrons from another layer of reality who put on the mask of God and learned to eat from our devotion. We don't have the final answer. What we do have is a pattern and a choice. We can look away or we can look harder. We aren't here to convert you. We are here to ask the question. To ask why the same patterns surface in far places and deep time. To ask who benefits when information is kept hidden.
Maybe the Anunnaki were our teachers. Maybe they were our jailers. Or maybe they were us.
Tune in next time as we peer deeper into the abyss on the Anunnaki Connection.
همس الريح في الأطلال ذاكرة ضاعت في عتمة زمان في صمك تسكن أساطيرنا القديمة وحكاياتنا مهمة في دفاتر الغياب نسي البشر وجوههم خلف الضباب وأذركوا في أصنام لاتي السراب أين الحقيقة والتي كانت في عيون الجدود وأي أثر تبقى في ذاكرة الحدود نسينا من نكون صرنا ضلالا في المدى قلوبنا جفت ولم يعد نرد درب الرفيع أين صوت الحقيقة ينادي في صدورنا أين النور والأسيل في ظلمة الليالي إيماننا في ذاكرة في الوضاق
For centuries, mankind has gazed at the stars, wondering if we are alone. Ancient texts. What if the cradle of civilization was also the site of our first encounter?